WNYC is supported by Vice News on YouTube, on the ground to bring users an unfiltered look at underreported stories around the globe. Users can comment, share, and subscribe now on Vice News' YouTube channel.
A ripple of determination to chart a new way forward, to offer an unapologetically progressive alternative to the Bloomberg era. 194,000 construction jobs will be created. More jobs and better jobs for New Yorkers. If we don't get to the root cause, which is wage levels and benefits levels, we're kidding ourselves. My mandate is a 5-borough plan for job training, job creation, job placement, because that's the vision that New Yorkers demand of us. Mejor cuando hayan más oportunidades para cada uno de nuestros residentes.
Advocates Report Card, subject, jobs. All this week we're getting advocates' reviews of Mayor de Blasio's first 6 months in office. On Friday we'll hear from First Deputy Mayor Anthony Shorris with the administration's take. We talked about the environment Monday, crime and policing yesterday, and today it's jobs. Here's about a minute of Mayor de Blasio on May 20th announcing a task force to reinvent job training programs as a way to fight inequality.
One of the most fundamental things we can do is create more quality jobs. Not more minimum wage jobs, more quality jobs, kinds that families can live on. And that is essential to our vision, and that's exactly where the Jobs for New Yorkers task force comes in. This task force is literally going to reinvent our approach to job creation, job training, job placement. We are going to tear down what was there before and rebuild, with the work of this task force, rebuild our effort. Because, in fact, what has existed before is a series of disparate training and placement efforts that too much of the time put people into temporary jobs, short-term jobs, minimum wage jobs. This is not what the people of this city are expecting from us. It's not what the taxpayers are expecting when they invest, literally, New York City today, spending almost $500 million on all our training and placement programs combined, but we're not getting our money's worth.
Mayor de Blasio in May. With us now, the renowned urbanist Richard Florida, NYU and University of Toronto professor and a senior editor at The Atlantic, and his new partner in urban reinvention, City Comptroller Scott Stringer. They are hosting a conference today on the future of the city's economy. It's sold out, I'm told, but they'll have a live stream that we put a link to on our page at 2 o'clock this afternoon. They are hosting this conference on the future of the city's economy and have co-authored an article called Building On-Ramps of Opportunity for a New Middle Class. So we'll kind of combine their mayor's report card with some of their own ideas being formally discussed today. Richard Florida, Scott Stringer, welcome back to WNYC.
Great to be here.
And you and the mayor seem to start out on exactly the same page, judging from my reading of your report and the clip we just played of the mayor, that the city is creating lots of jobs, Richard Florida, but the wrong kinds of jobs. How do you see the situation today?
Well, our economy's changed. And, I met the comptroller when he was Manhattan Borough President. We hit it off right away. I think we saw things pretty similarly. And as an academic, I have a pretty good sense of big picture trends, but I don't have my hands on the ground. And I think this comptroller, then as borough president, but now as comptroller, had a pretty good sense of what was happening in the city. We thought if we combined forces, and maybe we can make a special arrangement for a friend of the Brian Lehrer show. But look, our old middle-class jobs have evaporated. Our working-class jobs, our factory jobs over the past much of my life, in fact, have been going down, and our economy is bifurcated. We have done a very good job in this city of creating high-wage knowledge jobs. And what's interesting, we've been documenting this with our team at NYU and with Scott's office. We are creating not only finance jobs, we're creating a lot of great jobs in culture, arts, design, and entertainment and media. Those are growing at about an 11% clip since the recession. The problem is, of course, we're creating a lot of low-wage, low-skilled jobs. And I think what we're talking about is how to broaden the base of good jobs, but also push up that bottom. I think that's what the conference is about in our work. Push up that bottom of the low-wage jobs, and we have to make them better jobs. I think that's our real key here.
And a little bit of history, because you said low-skill, low-wage jobs. Is the historical context that we used to have a lot of low-skill, high-wage jobs or decent-wage jobs in the manufacturing era? Because just since 1990, according to your numbers, we've lost almost 200,000 manufacturing jobs in New York City. And of course, that's going on all over the country. But was the thing about the manufacturing era that large numbers of people could make a middle-class living without much education?
Yeah, we were a place where things were made. In the New York Metro, where I grew up in Newark, where my father worked in the factory in the Ironbound. And sadly, those jobs moved first southward, and then they moved overseas, or they were technologized or roboticized out of existence. We have about 2 million of these low-wage, low-skill service jobs in our economy, and they're growing at nearly 10%. They don't pay terrible here. They pay about $38,000. Now, some pay much less. Some pay in the 20s, and many people are doubling up. But I think the real task is what we did in the last crisis, in the Depression, is we turned manufacturing jobs from bad jobs to good jobs. And I think what we're beginning to talk about here with the comptroller's leadership is how we start to have a conversation about turning our new service. They're not destined to be bad jobs. There are ways for education using our school systems that this comptroller has been working on to make them better jobs, and I think that's where we got to go.
And it's funny about the manufacturing jobs. I mean, they didn't all go to Bangladesh. We talk about the Domino Sugar Factory in New York now being converted to housing, and the iconic sign there and the Kara Walker exhibit that was there is kind of goodbye to Domino Sugar. Last weekend, I was in Baltimore, and I took a harbor tour with some of the history of Baltimore. And there, sitting in Baltimore Harbor, is another Domino Sugar Factory with like the same exact sign, only they were talking about how they still produce sugar and they still employ all those people making sugar. And that's just Baltimore. That's not some exotic foreign land. So your on-ramps of opportunity approach begins in the public schools, Scott Stringer, and you single out, for example, how few computer science teachers we have.
So this is the challenge, and by the way, let me just say about the conference and having Richard Florida partner with us today is, I think, a very serious moment for academics, people who care and think about the New York City economy. And what we really want to do is have this conversation about what a New York City economy is going to look like, not just in the next 4 years. The controller looks at the 4-year financial plan, but this is a conversation about where we're going to be 10 and 20 years from now. And part of what we have to recognize is Richard Florida talks about the changing economy, the thought that he's put into understanding how critical the cities of this country are going to be going forward. We have to start understanding what's going to happen in New York City. We have, in the public school system, 100 computer science teachers. That is one computer science teacher for every 11,000 children. It's unbelievably ridiculous. At a moment when we are seizing on the high-tech economy, we're going to make an argument that the high-tech economy could be the gateway for every child in the city, whether you live Brooklyn, Bronx, Staten Island, wherever you come from, you can have an entry-level job that pays $60,000 and $70,000 a year. But in order to get that, you have to be educated, and nobody is there to teach you. So we have to look at what city government can do to change the way we're educating our children so they have a real opportunity to succeed.
And so the mayor in the clip talked about reinventing job training for jobs of tomorrow, not dead-end jobs. That's a city training program or group of training programs. Your agenda also includes working with employers to create new kinds of apprenticeships and other private sector training programs in coding and design and project management, what you call the high-tech equivalent of the skills that once supported so many New Yorkers who worked in manufacturing.
So can I just say, this is not complicated. What's complicated is how we move a bureaucracy. Every elected official would love to continue to say, I want to put an iPad in the classroom of every child. But no one ever has the hard conversation about how broadband has to support that. And while we have to have conversations about technology and fiber optics and how we're going to transform the city, how we're going to create a new communications network, that's going to take a lot of thought. Second, we have to absolutely have a conversation about making sure that every single child in the city understands what their opportunities are and make sure parents understand what a new economy is going to look like. It's no longer simply being shipped off to retail stores or working minimum wage jobs. We have an opportunity to transform this city, this wonderful moment where we can transcend all the previous conversations and start something different. The reason I think the Professor Florida's view of cities is critical is because everyone's moving to cities. The majority of the people in the world are going to live in cities, right, Professor?
Yes.
And we have to prepare for that. And we are the biggest city, in my view, in the world. And we have to prepare for that human infrastructure and the physical infrastructure to meet the new economy challenges.
We'll continue with Scott Stringer and Richard Florida in a minute. First, I want to take just a short break to tell you about something that's coming up later in the program and to invite you to participate. Listeners, do you have a meeting scheduled for next hour at work? If so, we want to invite you to take part in a little workplace meeting rebellion at exactly 11:15. Here's the idea. You find an excuse to duck out of your meeting at exactly 11:15, then call us on the air and talk about what makes a good or a bad workplace meeting. Are your meetings at work productive, or are they just a boring time suck? What makes a good or a bad workplace meeting? We're going to take these calls at exactly 11:15, so in about 35 minutes. Will anyone do this? Find an excuse to duck out of your meeting at exactly 11:15. I see your weak bladder beginning to act up right now. I see your kid calling from camp with a bee sting. Then call in and tell us what makes a good or a bad workplace meeting. You can be anonymous, of course. You can all call us Steve Jobs if you want, or somebody. Join our workplace meeting rebellion and tell us what makes a good or a bad workplace meeting on the air at exactly 11:15, okay? And now we continue with our advocates report card on de Blasio at 6 months, subject jobs, and we're combining this with a new report and event and series of proposals from New York City Comptroller Scott Stringer and his new partner in urban reinvention, NYU and University of Toronto urbanist Richard Florida. He's also a senior editor at The Atlantic. And Richard Florida, let me go back to the private sector involvement in your idea, working with employers to create new kinds of apprenticeships and other things. How do you get employers on board for this when I think an underreported story in general is the trend for employers not to do job training the way they did in the past, to push that expense onto government and onto individuals?
So two things really quickly. I just want to echo the comptroller's point about computer science. And it's not only to create new computer scientists. If you think about those kids who want to be musicians in hip-hop or independent music, they're only going to succeed if they know how to use a computer. That's why so many Swedes and so many Canadians have entered the business, because they're facile. Look at artists, look at culture, look at our space, Brian, media. The journalists who tragically are being laid off are the ones who don't know how to use a computer. The journalists who are getting hired are the ones who are these so-called, I'm making air quotes, data-driven journalists. So there's a disruption there. But I think with employers, I had a conversation with a big residential commercial investment firm the other day. And the young woman who ran that firm said, we have a real problem in retail. And we can't get people in the retail shops we operate in New York City or Boston or Toronto or Chicago. We can't get people to work in them because they live too far away. And they're making an hour and a half or 2 hour commute. What she was saying is a word that we heard, talent shortage of computer scientists or of software engineers. She was saying we face a talent shortage of people who are working in the service industry because they just can't make enough money to support their commute and their daycare. So two things. We got to work with those employers to help them understand this is a collective problem, that they've got to get that wage up to a living wage, a family wage, so that they can attract people. And two, one of the big advantages we have, and I pointed this out in New York City, we have a transit system that works so people can get to work. But two, we have to make sure that we start to build more and create affordable housing so those people can live closer to where we work. But I think the main point is the employers now, the big ones, are starting to feel the pinch. And it was before a pinch for those software engineers and big shot superstar talent. Now I think for the first time as the city reinvention, urban reinvention happens, they're starting to feel the pinch because they can't get the people they need to work even in the service units.
So how do you both think Mayor de Blasio is doing so far?
So it's a great question for what I wanted to say. So you take Richard Florida's urbanism vision. And then the question is, okay, yeah, and you have a conference. Then the question is, okay, how do you put it into practice? Because that's the role of government, right? You have a vision, and we have to get things done. So one of the things I give great credit to the City Council, Mayor de Blasio, is when we issued a report from my office, we did a data-driven report that showed that we did not have enough certified arts teachers in this city, and 400 schools did not have a robust arts education program. And when you broke down the data further, most of the schools that didn't have a certified arts teacher were in Bed-Stuy, Central Brooklyn, and the Bronx. And then the question is, okay, now we have this data, what do we do about it? City Council allocates $23 million with Mayor de Blasio's support. We sit down with the mayor. Two of us sat down and had a conversation. And just last week, we announced the beginning of putting 120 arts teachers in place. Now, can I just say, why is that important?
Does that lead to middle-class jobs?
Yes, because it's exactly what Professor Florida said. It's not just the science teacher or the art teacher. It's matching the skills of learning arts education and science and computer science that leads to opening up doors that are so different in the new economy than it was when I was in art class in junior high school.
Well, my view is, arts, media, entertainment, and design are growing at 11%. They're outpacing growth in the service economy, outpacing growth in business and management. It's what New York does really. If you ask me what New York does really well, it does this: arts, culture, media, design, even better than it does finance. So we have to do that. I think we have to step back and kind of congratulate New York. And I say that as someone who spends half of his time in Toronto. We followed up a good mayor with a complete bum, Rob Ford. And you think about how a bum in office can handicap a city. He just had a 38-0 vote from his city council. I think whatever the difference between Comptroller Stringer, Mayor de Blasio, Mayor Bloomberg, New York City has shown that it has a continuity of good leadership. One may be more center-right, one may be more center-left. But I think one of the interesting things is we're following this emphasis on an organized, data-driven government that might have been seen as benefiting, you know what I'm saying, the upper and middle class is a little bit too much, with a progressive focus. And what I like about this conference and what I really like about what the comptroller's doing, we've got to create an inclusive urban agenda. We all know this. It's not happening in Washington. The Democrats and Republicans in Washington aren't doing it. We got to do it in our cities, and New York City has long been the laboratory for this. So I think it's going to take a variety of ideas. The Blasio administration has some ideas, some good ones, some not so good ones. I have some good ideas, and I have plenty of not so good ideas. Working with the comptroller, we can have this, I think he said it, this conversation broadly with employers, with unions, the public sector, NGOs, academics, about what works. And one of the things I want to point out, this is about the whole city. We'll be following up this conference with reports not just of the city at the whole, but every single borough. Out of our program at NYU, we're going to look at the Brooklyn economy, the Bronx economy, the Staten Island economy, and really zero in on how they're changing. So I see that this is a start of a big conversation.
And I see that NYU is offering what you call a certificate in economic development. And Comptroller Stringer, I see that you're creating what you call an emerging business cabinet. Does that coordinate or compete with Mayor de Blasio's job training task force or anything else that he's announced since taking office?
This is the moment of all hands on deck. And look, we're creating different partnerships. The notion that Richard Florida would partner with a New York City controller even 3 or 4 years ago, who would even think that this was possible? But out of this collaboration, we put in place new ideas that Mayor de Blasio can grab. He'll agree with some. Yep. He'll disagree with others. He has his own priorities. But what I think is essential here is that we've got to come to terms with what a progressive city looks like, and we got to stop thinking of a progressive city in word only. It's going to take drilling down about what jobs we actually can create to lift everybody up.
I don't think that the mayor's speech that we excerpted from May, talking about what you're talking about, got much press. What we're hearing more about is the paid sick leave expansion, and that he dropped Mayor Bloomberg's lawsuit against an expansion of the living wage requirement for city contractors. So his emphasis, at least the one that gets discussed, is improving conditions for people already employed in very low-wage jobs. So how's he doing on job creation? Is it just not getting enough press, or is he putting too much emphasis on those low-wage workers who may well be exploited, but that's not the only issue?
Well, I think the economy is the culprit here, and the mayor is pushing as hard as he might in the right direction. The economy is creating a good number of high-wage jobs and a whole lot of low-wage jobs. So really the task is how do we elevate them. I have my own sense. I think we've got to raise the minimum wage. I'm not even sure the comptroller agrees with me on that, but I'll say my own.
I do.
So we got to get up to 50-60% of the local median to get people a floor and to awake those employers who don't get it.
And you've said $13 an hour, Scott Stringer.
And I've said that Albany should give us the right to set our own minimum wage because one size does not fit all. We have an 80% higher cost of living than cities like Buffalo and Albany and New York State.
And that doesn't scare jobs away?
No, the best research on this suggests that if you and this is the fellow at the University of Massachusetts and his colleagues at the University of California at Berkeley who've done the big studies, and we've replicated some of that research. As long as you don't push it above 60% of the local median, there's a point where you can go too high and chase people over the border. You go to 50 or 60% of the local median, which is in the range of 15 or maybe a little more in New York City, you're fine. But I also think we've got to work with the private sector through this Emerging Businesses Council that the comptroller is calling for to really bring together the best and most progressive business minds because they can create those on-ramps. They can create career ladder jobs. So maybe you start at $15. But instead of going out for a new person, you groom, just like in manufacturing, they groom the worker through the ranks. I think that's where we've got to go to upgrade these jobs.
Very briefly, Scott Stringer, and then we're out of time. Just on the living wage law, which I mentioned, the Times reported just last week that the mayor's office has not yet given your office a list of companies suspected of living wage violations because it's your office's job to investigate those companies. Where does that stand today?
My sense is that list will be coming shortly, and when that list comes, we'll go right to work.
And right to work is where we hope many more New Yorkers
Absolutely.
will go in great jobs. And we thank both our guests, NYU and University of Toronto professor and Atlantic Magazine senior editor Richard Florida, the renowned urbanist, now teaming with New York City Controller Scott Stringer for this Good New Jobs initiative. Their conference at NYU is at 2 o'clock this afternoon, sold out, but they will be streaming it. You can check our website for a link at wnyc.org. Click on Brian Lehrer Show. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.